This is Flesh and Blood Heroes in 20 minutes, and today we're covering the iconic warrior of Flesh and Blood, Dorinthea Ironsong. Dorinthea is a powerful warrior whose sword grows stronger every time she strikes. Wielding the legendary Dawnblade, she doesn't just threaten damage, she forces you to second guess every block. She's a master of mind games, turning hesitation into opportunity. One wrong move, and she'll be swinging at you again, this time with even more power. So before we dive into what makes Dorinthea tick, let's learn a little bit about her backstory. In the gleaming city of Solana, a young Dorinthea Ironsong was raised amongst the clinging of hammers and the glow of golden metal. Her family were famed blacksmiths, yet Dorinthea dreamed of not crafting blades, but wielding them. One day, during the Sacred Awakening ceremony, where children are revealed their divine path, Dorinthea expected the symbol of a blacksmith to appear, as all of her ancestors before her had. But instead, 100 swords lit with radiant energy, and one, the legendary Dawnblade, floated before her. Choosing her as her rightful wielder, her destiny was not to forge weapons, but to master them. Under the guidance of Templar Hala, she served Solana with honor, until one fateful mission changed everything. A village near the Savage Lands had gone silent. Dorinthea's squad was ordered to wait, but the cries of the innocent echoed louder than any command. Defying order, she rode out alone to save them. The rescue failed. Many lives were lost, including members of her own party. Disgraced, she returned to Solana, but soul never forgets its chosen. Years later, Dorinthea was summoned again. At the solstice of laurels, she stood reborn. Knighted once more, she vowed to wield her blade, not with just skill, but with wisdom. So what makes Dorinthea stand out in the arena? Let's break down some of her signature mechanics right now. First, there's Reprise, a warrior mechanic that activates when your opponent blocks with a card from hand. This mechanic is Dorinthea's bread and butter, turning your opponent's defenses into your momentum. Every time they block, they're setting up your next strike. Then there's Dawnblade, her legendary weapon that forms the core of her strategy. Unlike most weapons that stay static, Dawnblade grows more powerful with each successful hit, creating a snowball effect that can quickly overwhelm your opponents. The combination of Reprise and Dawnblade's scaling power creates a hero that thrives on momentum, setting up small advantages that compound into overwhelming pressure as the game progresses. Her hero ability reads, once per turn, if a weapon attack hits, you may attack an additional time with it. This seemingly simple ability is what enables her to have explosive turns. Landing that first hit doesn't just deal damage, it opens up the possibility for a second strike, doubling your offensive output. Dawnblade's unique mechanics tie directly into this. After hitting twice in a single turn, Dawnblade gains a semi-permanent +1 power counter. And these counters stack, meaning a Dawnblade that's connected multiple times can reach devastating power levels. But there's a catch. If you do not hit with Dawnblade every single turn, all counters are lost. This creates a thrilling risk-reward dynamic where protecting your investment becomes increasingly important as the game progresses. Success with Dorinthea revolves around building turns that guarantee consistent hits, whether through overwhelming your opponent's defenses or clever uses of reactions. Stacking these power counters is your path to late-game dominance. This unique scaling capability means Dorinthea plays differently in the early, mid, and late games, requiring adaptability and forward planning that rewards experienced pilots. Let's break down the key themes of Dorinthea's strategy. Every turn should make your opponent ask, can I afford to let this hit? The psychological pressure forces defensive plays, depleting their hand and setting you up for big swings. Cards like Iron Response, Glint the Quicksilver, and Stroke of Foresight allow you to punish incomplete blocks. When your opponent thinks they've defended sufficiently, these reactions push through those final points of damage. Sometimes just floating resources and representing an attack reaction can force inefficient plays. The threat of your cards can be as powerful as the cards themselves. Your core strategy should be evolving throughout the game. In the early game, test defenses, build your first Dawnblade counter, and conserve your best reactions. This is where you're gathering information and setting up for bigger turns. In the mid game, start layering your reactions to force hits and stack Dawnblade. This is where tempo becomes crucial. Every hit with Dawnblade increases your threat level for the next turn. And in the late game, protect your Dawnblade counters at all cost. A 5-power Dawnblade with Reprise becomes a win condition on its own, often forcing your opponent to block with their entire hand or face lethal damage. While Dawnblade Dori is the most dominant at tournaments on average, there are many playstyles that she supports, and we're going to cover 2 of those in a little bit of detail here. However, the focus of this video is going to be on Dawnblade. However, I will put some deck lists down in the description below if some of these playstyles vibe with you. The first alternative build we're going to cover is called Hatchet Midrange. This is a dual Hatchet build that transforms Dori from a high-risk snowball hero into a consistent value engine. Using Hatchet of Mind and Body, you'll create turn-over-turn advantages that shine in slower and grindier metas. These one-handed weapons each cost 1 resource to activate and gain bonus power when you alternate attacks with them. The rhythm of your offense becomes Hatchet of Mind, Hatchet of Body with +1 power, and then if you've hit, you can swing your weapon again, carrying over that 1 value. This is a consistent 1-2 punch that creates reliable pressure without the volatility of Dawnblade's counter system. The secret weapon here is Valiant Dynamo, a warrior leg equipment piece that gains +1 block every time you've attacked with 2 weapons on your turn. This +1 block creates an enormous blocking potential over a long game. Key cards like Blade Runner and Hit and Run enable your explosive turns by granting Go Again and giving you bonus power on your attacks. In order to attack 3 times on your turn, your first 2 weapon strikes must have Go Again. This is where these cards come in handy. Your typical play pattern will be something along the lines of play Hit and Run, attack with an axe. Play Blade Runner, attack with another axe. If either of those 2 axes hit, you may attack again, carrying over that value onto the remainder of this turn. This gives your opponent a very hard puzzle to solve every turn. Do they let you hit? Do you have 2 sources of Go Again? These mental mind games carry over from her Dawnblade lists. Even in her mid-range form, she's making your opponent answer a lot of questions. And it is likely on one of the turns they will answer wrong. The second build we're going to cover is called Decimator Dori. This is a build for those of you who prefer a much more defensive approach. Decimator Dori flips the script completely. This builds around the Decimator Great Axe, a powerful weapon that halves the defensive value of the first card used to block each turn. This creates a brutal dilemma for your opponents. Block with equipment and take full damage, or block with cards from hand and halve their defensive values. It is unlikely to be triggering Dori's hero ability very often with this build. However, you can pump the Decimator Great Axe to enormous values with cards like Felling Swing and Cleave. And unlike other Dorinthea builds, Decimator Dori fully embraces attack actions and defense reactions, as well as a full suite of high blocking cards, creating a turtle playstyle that gradually fatigues the opponent. By mixing together Decimator's defense punishing ability with a robust defensive shell, you force inefficient blocks turn after turn. This creates a war of attrition that very few heroes can survive in the long run. And there you have it. Now that you understand Dorinthea a little bit better, let's dive into her cards, a buy list, and then I'll show you guys a recent winning tournament list that you can take to any major around you. Let's go. All right, so I have this list in front of us, and I'm actually super excited to talk to you guys about this because this is probably the first budget list I've ever seen that is actually competitive at around $100. Now, I thought brutes were going to be the cheapest class in the game, but I was definitely mistaken here. Most of the core cards in this list you're going to see in competitive lists, and it is good, right? It's good. Now, this list was put together by my friend Davis Purcell. You actually saw him playing in this video. He had that 5-power Dawnblade in one of the example clips, and he's been playing Dori for a long time. And he went through for you guys and put together a list that gives you a nice, solid, competitive foundation that you can take to your armory and probably do really well, all right? Now, the main place you're going to be making sacrifices, just like most budget lists, is actually going to be the equipment. But let's dive into it right now. So, the main 3 pieces of equipment that you're really making a sacrifice on are going to be Braveforge Bracers, Courage Bladehold, and Helm of the Sharp Eye. Now, unlike most other budget lists, Braveforge Bracers and Courage Bladehold are actually good, right? They were mainstays for Dori for years before she got updated with some new legendary pieces. The only real kind of meh piece of equipment in this list is going to be Helm of the Sharp Eye. So go ahead and try and swap this out as soon as you can because it's kind of bad. But Braveforge and Courage Bladehold were actually mainstay points of a Dori list not that long ago. And they're very, very cheap. Luckily, Dori and all warrior players actually get to use refraction bolters as their common leg equipment, and it is best in class. This is not something you need to replace, and it will cost you $0 if you ask nicely at a local game store. So, at the end of the day, your equipment is a little lower than normal, but unlike almost every other class in the game, these pieces of equipment are good. Braveforge Bracers basically give you the ability to add 1 damage for any floating resources you have on a Dawnblade swing. Courage Blade Hold gives you some blocking power and lets you swing for free on a huge swingy turn if you're trying to take tempo or really push a Dawnblade counter. And then Refraction Bolters just give you a permanent, if my sword hits, I can grant it go again, fixing one of the turns where you don't have a go again piece. And then Helm of the Sharp Eye is kind of mid. I would replace this for a standard generic blocking piece of equipment, but we can look at the next list in a second and you'll see which your choices are, okay? And then your core list here. We'll start with the reds. You have your power reds in here. Ironsong Response, Puncture, right? Puncture is very good because it has a keyword piercing on it. And you really need to understand that warrior cards typically only buff by 3. There are very few cards that buff by 4. And the ones that do are super punishing because your opponent is probably going to assume that you can't go 1 more over. And if they block with a piece of equipment, boom, Puncture's a +4. Then you got your standard buff cards, right? Sharpened Steel gives your Dawnblade +3. Spoils of War gives it +2 and go again. And then a boom, Power Majestic here, Steel Blade Supremacy. This card gives you +2 power. And whenever you hit with a weapon this turn, you can draw a card. Very good. That card draw can funnel into your next Dawnblade attack, can funnel in an attack reaction. It's really, really nice. Stroke of Foresight, we talked about in the video. It's a +3. Has a nice solid reprise trigger, and you're going to notice something really clear in this list. Almost every warrior card blocks 3. So the only ones that don't are hybrid cards, Brute/Warrior, and then anything that came out of the heavy hitter set, unfortunately doesn't really block 3, but 90% of warrior cards are going to block that magic number 3. Very good, very mid-rangey. And then you're going to have your Rainbow Warriors Valors here. This is a plus to your attack power, and if your Dawnblade hits, it grants it go again. Super strong, right? That's why you run Rainbow of them. And then Singing Steelblade, another one of those magic +4 value majestics here, or not really majestic, it's a supreme or super card, right? This is a specialization. It is a nutso card. Get this card early, but it gives +1 and lets you tutor up something like Ironsong Response. So really, this will come into the combat chain as a +4, granting you that magic 1 point of penetration, hopefully leading to a Dawnblade counter. It's also tricky because you can pull up pretty much anything in your list. In any of those niche scenarios, you can pull up something super surprisey, special, whatever, and you're going to go right over the top. Beautiful. Ironsong Determination grants Dominate, one of the best ways to give yourself a +1 counter. It's only +1 compared to your average +3 here, but Dominate is an amazing keyword, right? Some decks could just crumble when this card comes out. And then you got Twinning. Now, you're not always going to see Twinning in every list, but it is nice to have a copy or two because it can come in and out depending on your play style. This one basically grants Dori's hero text 1 more time, and you can do some really surprise gotcha turns with a Twinning Steelblade. It is a hard thing for your opponent to play around, the idea that you don't have to hit to give your Dawnblade go again. And in some scenarios, when you have like +2 counters on it, you throw your Dawnblade at your opponent and they're like, okay, I have to shut this turn down. They give you their whole hand. And then you go, Twinning Blade, attack. And they crumble on the spot, right? Very nice, very tricksy. And then you have your blues. So all of these blues are just pretty good. They're pretty much the best in class blues in the list. The one that is going to demand the most conversation is probably Glint the Quicksilver here. It is amazing. Blue, block 3, 0 cost, gives go again. Lets you draw a card. If you trigger Reprise, card is cracked. And then the rest of these blues, they're just good, right? Trot Along's a relatively newer card, gives your Dawnblade 3 again, or go again. Precision press, nip at the heels, right? Just solid foundational 3 blocking blues. The only 2 cards in the entire list that don't block 3, again, are Goblet and Lead with Speed. And then down here at the bottom, all right? So we're going to have our full suite of defense reactions, instants, and all that kind of stuff. Dori typically does like to play a little bit mid-rangey, a little bit slow until she whams her Dawnblade counters up into the sky. So you got Fates, Sinks, Take It on the Chins, right? Just giving you another go again on your next turn, and Oasis Respite. And then you got Route here, a nice one of surprise gotcha card, right? This is a one where if your opponent commits to blocking, you can actually send a card back into their hand, demanding that your Dawnblade hits unless they have a defense reaction. Pretty sick. It's a little costly. That's why you're not running too many of these. But at the end of the day, it's another one of those like, can your opponent plan for every weird scenario you're going to throw at them? Probably not. And this card will give you a Dawnblade counter. Then you got Jagged Edge here. It is pretty good, a 1 for 3. But the main reason you're going to see this in your lists is because illusionists historically have been a horrible matchup for Dawnblade, right? An absolutely horrible matchup. So Jagged Edge, a brand new card that came out and hunted, is very, very good for Dori players. And that's why you're starting to see Dori do pretty well, even in Enigma metas, okay? Then you got your standard AB equipment piece here. Nice, nice, nice. No big deal. And then Count Your Blessings. Now, this card doesn't necessarily have the best track record with the players of Flesh and Blood. It isn't the most exciting card to play. It basically just heals you. The more copies of this card that you've played, the more it heals, right? But with Dawnblade Dori, what it does very differently, those two floating resources, your opponent has no idea what's going to happen every turn, right? So if you're floating 2, your opponent has to now guess even more, right? Even more than normal, because maybe they commit too many cards to the block and then you just heal. And your opponent A wasted defense value and you gained an advantage. Or your opponent goes, maybe they have a Count Your Blessing, don't block that much. And then you go, wah, right over the top, get that Dawnblade counter. So with Dori, it just leads to even more mind games. So I think it's just super solid to have in your lists. All right. Especially with like a Fendal's Tunic, you're going to have that one resource floating. You can be bluffing any one of your 1 power attack reactions or Count Your Blessings throughout the entire game. Talk about making your opponent guess wrong for pretty much ever, okay? Boom, we have the competitive list on the screen, and this list was just taken to 3rd place at a battle-hardened event down in Brazil. And you're going to see I edited it just a little bit to hide some of the expensive cards down in the inventory slots, but this list costs a whole $200, all right? Not bad at all. And one of the best things is that the budget list that we just looked at covers a vast majority of these cards, okay? You're going to see the same couple of equipment pieces here at the top. You're going to see your Count Your Blessings, a lot of those similar cards, Steelblade Supremacy, Stroke of Foresight, Spoils of War, right? Puncture, Ironsong, Warrior's Valor, Glint, they're all here, right? Only a couple key differences, mostly in the blues a little bit, and those are honestly just decision-making meta-style picks anyways. But you're going to see Blade Fury here, a little bit of a pricey Majestic that's added in. You're going to see another card, Unsheathed here, added in a little bit of a pricey tag on this Majestic as well. But honestly, if you take out a couple of these blues, swap them around and buy those 6 copies of Majestics there, you have a very competitive list. Now, unfortunately, where all of the price comes from, if we add in these cards here at the bottom, this list goes all the way up to $900. And that's a lot to ask for a new player. But let's talk about which ones you should be picking in which order and why these cards are here in the first place. So the easiest one to talk about is Shelter of the Storm. Honestly, this is a overhyped, overpriced Majestic. It is very good in certain matchups because of its discard trigger here, preventing 3 damage over 3 turns. Very good in Syndra, was very good in the Viserai, has some use cases here. But honestly, supplementing these for like a Sink Below or a Fate Foreseen, you're only losing a few points, okay? Only a few points, and very much in particular matchups. So I would try and wait for this card to come down in price. Hopefully LSS does something about it in the future. And then you're going to have just about every piece of equipment available to Warriors right here. And that's because Dori really has some bad matchups, right? So the pilot of this list put in specific pieces of equipment to deal with those matchups in particular, right? Vambrace has almost no use outside of Illusionist gameplay, but Illusionist is Dori's worst matchup. So they stuck Vambrace in there. If I was going to buy cards in a particular order coming from the budget list, I would buy Crown of Providence first because Sharpen Eye that was in that last list is pretty bad. And this is just a solid card that is good in every matchup no matter what. Does it have the same kind of niche scenario ability as Kabuto here? No, right? This card is better into particular heroes, namely heroes who want to attack you a lot with weapons and Blood Rush characters like Brutes. But This is going to be good all the time. Pick it up first. It is solid, and then it'll complete that armory level, local level tournament Dori list. Then I would pick up Fendal Spring Tunic, following the same logic. It's just always good. There's never really a time where you're like, man, this one resource is bad for me right now, right? No, it's good all the time. It's good in every matchup. Grains is a little bit more difficult to use. It does have a higher blocking value. That's particularly the main difference. And if you have floating resources, it lets you generate value into your next turn, which is quite good depending on your matchup. And then Ironsong versus last. If for the first 3, I would pick up. This card's just good. It blocks 2, gives you a little bit more damage on your next turn. Kind of similar to the one that we looked at in the budget list. It's just a little bit better depending on your matchup. All right. And then these pieces right here are more niche case scenarios, right? These are good for specific matchups. You don't have to pick these up right away. And then honestly play with Fate for Scene or Sink Below first before picking up Shelters, okay? But yeah, the list is like almost identical, right? It's just going to come down to a handful of blue differences and then those 6 Majestics that we just looked at, Blade Fury and Unsheathed. And there you go, dude. Like $200, $100, you have an armory ready list. Dori is sick for new players. This is dope. All right, to close out this video, instead of doing the regular gameplay, I'm just going to link a bunch of videos in the description below of all of those tournaments I've covered. You can also go onto savagefeats.com, type in Dori, and see every tournament she's ever been in live on stream and watch the best players in the world pilot her. Probably better than watching me pilot her, to be very honest. But all right, to put Dori in that TCG archetype that you're probably accustomed to if you come from other games, we're going to start here. On the aggro scale, she's kind of a weird one. She's like a 5 or a 6, but once she starts getting counters, she becomes a very heavy-hitting aggro deck. But most of the game, she's going to be blocking and trying to build up those counters, not necessarily starting out the gate going ham, all right? On the combo side, she does have like a little bit of combo to her, but honestly, not very much. She's just going to be playing cards as she receives them, maybe pitch stacking something later or a big dominate style ender, but most of the time, no. She's really just kind of playing the cards, trying to trick your opponent into misblocking. She's a very defensive deck. She blocks very well. All warrior cards block 3. She runs D-reacts, so she's a pretty good defending hero. She kind of has that mid-range, quote unquote mid-range archetype. However, that is not really the easiest thing to define in Flesh and Blood. On the control side, probably one of the weakest control decks in the game. She's really just trying to control you by mind gaming you into overblocking or overcommitting, okay? She's really just a ramp hero. And then on the ramp side, right? Very heavy on the ramp. That's what her entire hero concept is built around. That's what her special weapon is built around. She is one of the first, only, and major ramp heroes in the game. There's not that many of them, and Dori is a tried and true ramp hero. And then on the difficulty side, I would say she's a little bit difficult to pilot, mostly because you really need to understand the blocking nature of every hero you're playing against. And you also need to be a good bluffer to play warrior, right? To play Dori. So you really need to understand your opponent's mental. You need to understand their deck concept. You need to understand what cards they have in deck, what their defense values are. You need to know when to use your power turns. So I'd say she's pretty difficult to pilot. Her game plan is pretty straightforward, but it's that like poker style mental edge you need to be a really good Dori player. On the unique side, right, she's the first and only, she's the first ramp hero in the game. She's the only ramping warrior hero. She has that unique multi-stacking kind of Dawnblade counter mechanics to her. So I'd say she's pretty unique. And on the tournament side, she's actually weirdly always been pretty good. Even in bad metas, there's always that weird surprise Dori that makes it the day 2 top 8. Right now she's hitting top 8. And this is a meta that is wildly different than it was like back in the day during those defensive-y styles, right? And we covered it in the video. She has so many different play styles that she's kind of like always a weird dark horse deck. So I'd say Dori is always pretty tournament ready. On the matchup side, she has a lot of super good matchups, especially on the aggro side. However, she does have some really bad ones. When the meta is filled with illusionists and Oldhim players, Dori isn't doing that great. So put her right in the middle, mostly because of the polarization of her matchups. I would say on the average, she's actually got more favorable matchups than unfavorable. It's just been historically, the unfavorable ones are so bad that if you run into an illusionist, it could be a tournament ender, right? So I'm going to put her kind of in the middle. And on the badass scale, I think Dori's a badass. She's super unique, has an interesting kind of backstory. The ramping mechanic is super cool. The way her hero ties into a direct weapon is really unique, so kind of sick. And then on the matchup side, so just to give you guys a perspective of what you need to be walking into for a tournament from a matchup perspective, you're going to notice it's kind of like at the top, the hard matchups are heroes who are super defensive or illusionists, right? Pretty much every illusionist is a bad matchup. Most of the guardians are a bad matchup. And then any hyper fatigue deck is going to be very challenging for you to get those Dawnblade counters to go over the top. So Teklos, Riptides, Jarls, Bravos, it's going to be hard to land your points, especially if they're fatigue versions. Victor's the same. Enigma and Prism are just bad, right? On the rough side, you're starting to go into that like semi-defensive tier, right? Azuri, Florian, Rhinar, right? Rhinar is a defensive deck that has a lot of offensive output. It can hit you back. New can take cards from your hand. Very important blues that need to make Dori's power, like that power Dori's turns. Ira's have got all the D-reacts in the game. Florian's kind of the same way, right? So it literally, the tier list is like hyper fatigue decks, kind of defensive decks, and then everybody else is a skill checker, kind of good for you. And then towards the bottom, right, you're going to see all of those aggro decks. Any deck that doesn't block that well, has 2 blocks, hates blocking in general, you're going to find that matchup to be kind of favorable. So Rune Blades, relatively favorable. Brutes that aren't Rhinar, pretty good because they don't run D-reacts, right? Zen, Ninjas, pretty good. Bolton, other warriors, pretty good because a lot of the time, any deck that's not running a defense reaction is going to let you execute your game plan pretty effectively on your own terms, right? It's only when they really have a lot of defense reactions where you're going to have to ask a lot of questions and try and probe and get through their defenses. And of course, this list could be slightly inaccurate. I wasn't exactly sure where to stick Verdance and all that kind of stuff, right? But on the average, defensive hyper fatigue decks, bad. Mid-range decks, skill check. Aggro decks, favorable, okay? Don't quote me on every one of these placements, but I did my best. And so with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful time. I hope you have a wonderful day. And I hope that you build this list and start crushing it because Dori is a really interesting hero. And I think it might be a hero I'm about to explore myself. Go ahead and tell me which hero you want to see next on this list for the 20-minute segments. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.